all. So as promised, I wanted to continue with the 3 periods of development for the embryo. So the first is the pre-embryonic period, which is literally from the time that ovum, that egg, was fertilized here until the time it implants. So we're talking like 8 to 9 days, right? Really short window of time. But in this period, what I want to share with you is we call it an all or nothing period, so that it's a period of time that if mom was exposed to, doing cocaine, partying, having a lot of alcohol in her system, the pregnancy is either going to move on to be totally fine following that event in the pre-embryonic period, or cause her to have a miscarriage. So an insult or an injury here to the development just causes miscarriage, so implantation just wouldn't happen. We don't tell people to go out and do those activities, obviously, but if somebody comes in and is 8 weeks pregnant and says, oh my gosh, before I missed my period, this happened, is everything going to be okay? If she's 8 weeks pregnant and she's not continuing those behaviors, it was in fact a 1 episode thing when she was maybe 4 days pregnant, it probably isn't going to cause any issue. So what you need to remember is pre-embryonic period from fertilization to implantation is an all or nothing period, okay? So in thinking about implantation, it usually occurs about day 8 to 9, on average somewhere between 6 to 10 days. So some people can confuse this with a period because when implantation happens, women often get a little bit of pink spotting. Some women may think that is a light period. In terms of where should implantation happen, we talked about it in terms of near the fundus, so fundally, right? Up high. So the upper portion of the uterus is where it really should be. How do we know there's been implantation? Well, obviously somebody misses their period. They are then secreting what's called HCG hormone and would have a positive preg test, right? So the next stage is embryonic development. Here is your critical stage. Having that heroin, alcohol in a woman's system during these weeks 2 to 8, so from implantation on, would cause a huge issue to the developing baby. So really, really critical. So at this point, we are so super sensitive as a fetus to teratogens. Okay, so marry that in your brain, that this is the sensitive spot. These 3 germ layers, we all start as these 3 layers and then develop into who we are. You don't need to memorize these, but you should be aware of them. So the endoderm becomes our digestive tract. And then you have the ectoderm, which becomes our epidermis. And then you have this also becoming brain and spinal cord. The mesoderm actually becomes our dermis and our connective tissue. So again, not a point of memorization for that, but just to know. This is showing you here on day 9 how the amniotic cavity forms. So for yourself, go ahead, take a look down here and here, these last 2, about how that trophoblast we talked about is then actually becoming both the placenta and the area where the fetus is going to develop. Again, not a point of memorization, but I want you to look through this and sort of understand how implantation is happening and how that trophoblast, which is here, is now going to become both the placenta, so here we're in the endometrium, and then the pregnancy piece over here. In terms of fetal development, in this embryonic period, it's really, really important to remember that when we're in this embryonic period, we're only up to here. So we're up to week 8 of life, right? Is where we're focusing on in terms of embryonic. So from this line on over is where we are. So what are the crucial things to remember? So obviously the heartbeat. The heartbeat will start right around 6 weeks. So it's really, really critical to pay attention to where the heart is and when we see that. It's also important to sort of think about what's developing at the same time. So a baby's ears, kidneys, and umbilical cord are all working on development at the same week. So that often if we see an issue with a baby's kidneys, they often would have ear deformities as well because they're forming at the same time. So if an injury from a teratogen was to happen in that week, kidneys, ears, umbilical cord all happening together, we'd often see an issue with all three of those things. So you want to just sort of look at this broadly, understand the heartbeat, but really focus on an insult at any point is going to affect what's developing that week. At the end of this period, guys, this embryonic development, every organ system for the baby is completely laid down. The baby isn't able to be to survive out of the uterus. However, every organ system is there and in place, which is quite amazing in such a short amount of time. This is giving you a picture of what I was talking about. So going through week 3, week 4, here at week 6, remember you've got your heartbeat starting. So we can see that on ultrasound at this point. And then a week 8 fetus. The last portion is what's called the fetal period. So you may be saying, okay, well, what does the baby do here if all the organ systems are laid down? Well, all those systems are going to just mature, but they're all already there. The biggest thing in the fetal period is the brain and the lungs. A baby needs to fully develop these, and that doesn't happen until full term, which is 39 completed weeks of pregnancy, and I will talk about this. But fetal period, you should be thinking brain, lungs. The other thing is that the baby is putting on weight during this period. So here is that fetus at 16 weeks, just so you can sort of see a picture. This is also showing you and focusing on the fact that, that we are really working on brain and lungs in this fetal period. So interestingly, I leave this in here because I have mentioned to you guys that I've taught this being pregnant. So I put in here that I was so excited, and I've always counted down and didn't really celebrate until I hit 24 weeks. And that's because 24 weeks is really the point of viability for a fetus. We are doing life-saving measures at Yale specifically for 23-week fetuses. They have the skill set to be able to do that and the tools. So 23 to 24 weeks is when we start to save a baby if a woman has a delivery prematurely. And so at 24 weeks, could a baby breathe on its own? Absolutely not. But at 24 weeks is sort of this turning point where we would work to try to save and do life-saving measures for a baby. This is what a 24-weeker would look like, which is why I'm saying here are all the measures that we do, which we'll talk about for high-risk newborn, and you guys will continue talking in pediatrics. But this baby, needs to be in the ICU for at least 16 weeks until it gets to, 40 weeks full term, and has a lot of issues and risks, which we'll talk about when we talk about high-risk newborn. So there is debate, and patients will sort of ask you, well, why can't I just have my baby a couple of weeks early? If you look here in the last 4 weeks of pregnancy, right, because pregnancy is 40 weeks. So in these last couple of weeks of pregnancy, the brain is doing tons of work to lay down more folds, to be more mature and more developed. So it's super important to go full term, which is 39 weeks. The next video I have on Blackboard already shows you the placenta and fetal membranes, and it's really well done, so I don't want to belabor you guys. I want you to get that information. I am going to just forward. There are 3 case studies at the end, and these would actually be helpful for you to think about. So case study 1, think about in terms of prepping for the quiz. They will be multiple choice questions, but these will help you. So you want to think about what period is she in: pre-embryonic, embryonic or fetal period and what it means about this when she partied. So think about that. In this second case, you want to think about teratogens and what we would counsel pregnant women on in terms of alcohol. And that really you can stem from our conversation in class today. And this third one, we had talked about in depth today, a certain thing in a woman's medical history when we're thinking about genetics. And so you want to think about here what's really important. And I know you guys are covering some diabetes, so this hemoglobin A1C would be very high. This would be indicative of a woman who's in poor diabetic control. So I want you to think about what we'd be worried about for her in counseling. And then prenatal care is super important, so we can address most of these things before somebody gets pregnant. Feel free to email me and let me know if there's questions or concerns. And also, please watch the conception video that I have linked on Blackboard. It's 3 minutes in length, but is an amazing, amazing visual. All right, I would look forward to seeing you guys Thursday, and great work today.